Yeah, messieurs! Welcome back to the Spearfishing channel. In this video, I went back out with the gem crew from last video and we decided to hit the north of the island. We started out the day at Pebble Beach, which is a very popular dive spot on the Atlantic coast. In St. Lucia, it's a well-known fact that the Atlantic side of the island holds lots of big fish. However, most of the time, it's way too rough to dive over there, so we don't really get opportunities to hunt these zones. On this drop, I was swimming along the bottom while using the reef as cover, and as I was about to head up, I caught a glimpse of a nice mutton snapper. As soon as I saw it, I swam back down and went in for a shot. I took a long shot on that fish and I was really unsure of my shot placement, so I just went up to the surface and let it take line. Unfortunately, it went and used that freedom to wrap me up in the reef. I was originally going to wait it out on the surface and go back down to retrieve it myself, but my partner Chucky saw what was going on and he went to go help me out. He put in a backup shot, freed up the fish from the reef and came back up to the surface. All I had left to do was pull up the fish from the bottom and he had put in a stone shot, so it wasn't even fighting coming up. As I got it to the surface and saw my shot, I realized that without his help, I probably would have lost that fish. That just goes to show how important teamwork is in what we do. After taking out that nice 4.5 pound mutton snapper, we continued diving around pebbles, and while we were swimming around, I spotted a nice Cero from the surface. I didn't waste any time making a dive bomb on the fish, and I just swam towards it to try and get a shot in. I don't know what it is with me and Ceros, but I can never put in a good shot. I hit the fish really low in the belly and it looked like it was going to tear out, so I played the fish super delicately. I was just pulling it up slow enough to keep tension, and as soon as I got the chance, I grabbed onto its tail. Those gut shots are really stressful because on most fish it's the softest parts, and with mackerel being especially soft, it's just a high chance that you're going to lose the fish. As soon as I got that fish secured, we swam over to the boat, and once everyone was on board, we decided to leave Pebbles. We didn't really travel very far and we ended up stopping at one of my favorite mutton snapper zones. I hadn't been to this mark in about 6 or 7 months, so I was super excited to get on the bottom and start hunting. In this area, the fish normally hang at the bottom and cruise around the reef down at 60 feet. Whenever I'm making deeper drops like these, I go straight to the bottom and try not to get distracted by anything else. That just lets me focus all my energy into going down, so I'll have more bottom time. However, while I'm heading down, I will still spin around to see where the best place to position myself is. I find in areas like these where it's made up of sand and rocks, the best place to land is on the line between the reef and sand. That just gives you a good position on the bottom to run into fish that are swimming over the sand and fish that are swimming over the reef. Once I'm on the bottom, I'll usually do some grunting and scratching while looking around to see if I can spot anything. As I'm scanning the area, this really nice mutton snapper swam up to me and turned broadside. I went for a stone shot, but I ended up missing and it tried to wrap me up in the reef. As I was heading to the surface, I was just trying to keep it away from the bottom so it wouldn't get me tangled up. I was able to keep it free, and when I hit the surface, I was able to pull it up without any issues. This one came in at 4 pounds, which is about as small as we get them at that mark. It's definitely not a bad fish by any means, but the only reason I settled for it was because I didn't want to spend too much time on the bottom while diving so deep. I brained and bled that fish to preserve the meat quality, and I got ready to make another drop. I could feel that there was a strong current pushing me around on the surface, and with the viz being so poor, I had to make blind drops hoping that I was still over the reef. As soon as I started to make out the bottom, I realized that the current had pushed me past the reef line and I was landing on the sand. I still continued heading towards the bottom as normal though, because I didn't want to waste a perfectly good breathe up. As soon as I touched down on the bottom and I looked up, I noticed that there was a nice barra hanging out in the water column. I just laid flat on the bottom while grunting and dusting and it came right in. Just like that last snapper, I was aiming for a stone shot but just barely missed, and that fish took off like a rocket and wrapped me around the reef. As I was heading back up to the surface, I was absolutely dreading having to go back down and untangle that fish. But once I actually made it back to the surface, I got super lucky. While that barra was freaking out and struggling on the bottom, it managed to untangle itself and it saved me an extra drop down to 60 feet. I just had to pull that fish back up to the surface, and because it was struggling on the bottom, it barely had any fight left in it. Once I got it close enough, I slid my hand down the spear and grabbed it behind its head. The first thing I did as soon as getting it into my hands was to brain and bleed the fish, just so it wouldn't cause any trouble and to preserve the meat quality. This was a really nice 6.5 pound barra and a great fish to add on to my carrier. After shooting it, I called the boat over to reset my drift because the current was way too hard for me to swim back up the reef myself. As soon as I hopped in the water, I noticed that there were tons of barjacks around. This was the exact same scenario when I shot my giant king mackerel, so I was really feeling like I was going to see something massive on this drop. As I was heading down, I noticed that there was a huge school of maquio hanging around the bottom. I don't know the English name for them, but it's a type of baitfish that tends to attract big predators like African pompanos, king mackerels, and big barracudas. All the signs were just pointing to there being a giant fish in the area, so when I hit the bottom, I was really on edge. I just did some grunting while looking around, and I could see a bunch of smaller snappers hanging in the distance. They were probably around the same size as the last one that I shot, and I had a mind to take one, but I was really wanting to see if there was anything bigger around. I was doing my grunting and scratching on the bottom for a while, and when I looked to my right, I saw a really weird shape in the middle of the water column. I couldn't really make out what I was looking at, and it turned broadside to reveal a giant barracuda. When I saw the size of it, I jumped and it ended up spooking and running off. I tried to swim towards it, hoping that it would come back around, but I was just making the situation worse. I was running out of breath and I knew I wasn't going to get close to it, so I just went back up to the surface. A few months after this encounter, my partner Zibo ended up taking a 35-pound barra in that same area. He was out with his brother Bendo that day, and judging by this video, it's safe to say that they were very excited about that catch. Based on the similarities between his fish and the one that I saw, I really think it was the same one, so big up Zibo on shooting the fish that I wasn't able to. That barra has to be one of the biggest ones that I've ever seen, and definitely way bigger than my PB of 21 pounds. This is the fish that put Zibo on the map as far as St. Lucian divers go, and I can't wait to do some videos with him and his brother in the future. After my encounter with that big barra, we changed spots and went to the same mark where I caught my second big mutton snapper in last week's video. On this particular day, the current was absolutely ripping there, so I needed the boat to drop me above the reef before every dive. I know this reef fairly well, so I made my drop as soon as I was in the area that I wanted to land. I just headed straight to the bottom while fighting the current and positioned myself in this big crevice in the reef. I started swimming along it while grunting, and as I was heading down the reef, I saw this big school of mangrove snappers hanging to my left. I stopped moving and started facing them using that tall piece of reef as cover and just waited for the biggest one to present a shot. I saw a standout fish starting to swim towards me, but it turned out at the last second. I just pulled back my gun and waited, and it came back around and presented a perfect shot. Because the barracuda that I shot tangled me up in the reef, I switched to a single wrap, so keeping this fish off the bottom was no problem. I just let myself float up to the surface and pulled up my fish, and it turned out to be a really solid grey snapper. It weighed in at 3 pounds, which is a really nice size for them here, and as always I brained and bled my fish to preserve the meat quality. By the time I had dealt with that fish, the current had already pushed me way off the reef, so the boat picked me up and reset my drift. I made my drop in the exact same place and went straight to the bottom. This time I made my duck dive higher up the reef so the current would push me into position on its own. That just allowed me to get to the bottom a lot easier and without burning as much energy. So as soon as I got to the bottom, I started grunting to try and bring in the fish. Because of the first fish I shot, the school was acting a bit skittish and they wouldn't come into range. However, after a while of me laying on the bottom, they started to get a bit more comfortable with me being there. A couple really nice ones started swimming up to me but turned away last minute and they went down behind the reef. I just stayed where I was and waited to see if they would come back around. I wasn't seeing any fish that I wanted from where I was, so I started crawling towards the school and noticed this big one cutting in front of me. I put in a really nice holding shot, and again with that single wrap it was super easy to keep the fish off the bottom. I treated that fish just like the other one and pulled it straight up to the surface. It was another really nice mangrove snapper, and as soon as I got it in my hands I raised it up to show the boat. I remember boarding the boat after shooting that fish, and my partner Brendo made a joke about how I'm not even diving at this point and I'm just shopping. Everyone had a good laugh at that because throughout the whole day I was just taking out nice snappers back to back and most people on the boat were struggling just to get pot fish. At one point I even had Bendo dive at the same spot where I saw that school of mangrove snappers, but they didn't even show up. I was just having a really good day, and after taking this nice 2.5 pound grey snapper, I moved to a deeper part of that same reef. Before making this particular dive, I had already made a couple drops, so I knew that the reef was about 40 feet deep here. Also, because it was one of those flat reefs, I just went straight to the bottom and didn't really care about my positioning. On flat reefs like this, no one spot is better than the other, and you kinda just have to lie on the bottom and hope for the best. I find that the main kind of fish you'll see on these reefs are mutton snappers, so when I hit the bottom I did some grunting to try and attract any in the area. I was mostly just looking in front where my gun was pointed, and something told me to turn around and look behind me. I saw this nice mutton snapper try and creep up from behind, so I pretended like I didn't see it and watched back in front. I pretended to look around like I was before I saw the fish while trying and take glances at it to track its movements. Because I didn't react when I first saw the fish, it didn't feel threatened by me, so it just swam right in front and gave me a perfect shot. I was going for a stone shot, but I just aimed a little bit low and it tried to wrap me up in the reef. However, with my single wrap, I was able to pull it right off the bottom and I just went straight up. All I could think of after shooting that fish was that Bendo just finished telling me I was shopping, and I went ahead and shot another nice mutton snapper. This one was the biggest of the day, coming in at 5 pounds, and once I got it into my hands I just brained and bled the fish to preserve the meat quality. It was getting kinda late in the day, so after taking that nice fish and putting it in my shopping cart, we had moved by Marcy and we went a little closer to shore. As we were pulling up to this spot, I was kinda skeptical whether or not there would be fish here, but once I actually got in the water and made a couple dives, I realized that this reef had a lot of potential. It's a very rocky reef with a sharp sand line and lots of tall boulders scattered around. So when I was making my drop, I just went right next to one of those tall boulders as cover. Because of all the amazing structure on this reef, it just looked like a zone to hold big predatory fish, so when I hit the bottom I just did my grunting to try and attract any that were in the area. I wasn't really seeing much fish on this dive, but I stayed on the bottom because I had a lot of faith in my hunting technique and this spot. The thing about fish is that they're just naturally curious. When you spend a lot of time on the bottom, you pique that curiosity and they're more likely to swim towards you. That's why I always look at it as the more time I spend on the bottom, the more likely I am to see a fish that I want to shoot. At some point in the drop, I had seen some kind of fish that I wanted to shoot, so I turned my gun towards it and started dusting. Whatever I was looking at was not going to come into range and I was about to give up. Right as I was about to head to the surface, I saw this really nice school of yellowjacks passing by. I took a nasty shot on the biggest fish, and given the time that I had to react, I think it was a really good shot. The only problem with it was that the angle of the shot caused the spear to rip a really big hole in the other side of the fish, which you'll see once I get it to the surface. Regardless, this was a really nice fish for me for multiple reasons. First of all, this was my biggest yellowjack at the time, coming in at 4 pounds. It was also my first yellowjack since coming back from school, and with them being one of my favorite fish to eat, it was really nice to have that fish to add into my cooler. As always, I brained and bled the fish to preserve meat quality and got ready to make another dive. As we continued hunting along the reef, I noticed that the reef and sand line kept on getting shallower as we went up. By the time I made this drop, we were already diving in about 25 feet of water. It's a bit shallower than I would normally dive, but because it was getting late, I kinda just wanted to see if I could get one more fish to end the day. I landed on the bottom and positioned myself behind these two rocks facing the sand. On my previous dives, I was seeing some nice mahogany snappers, so that just put me in a perfect position to hunt them. I did my grunting as I normally would and just scanned the area to wait for them to come by. Eventually I saw those fish start to swim towards my right, so I just slowly turned to face them. I really took my time with it and I didn't turn my hand right away because I didn't want them to spook. Once I was sure that they weren't going to turn back away, that's when I really put my gun towards them and I just looked for the biggest one to take a shot. I popped that fish with a nice shot through the side and just went straight to the surface. These mahogany snappers aren't the biggest fish ever, but they're very good eating, so I didn't mind having that be my last fish of the day. As you could probably tell by the way the video was looking, it was getting late, so we started to pack up to go home. As we were on the boat getting organized for us to run home, Travis took out some videos of everybody's catch and I just took out my part to show y'all. Yeah boy Travis, big up on the videos. If you know, you know. That about wraps up all the footage from this incredible day of diving. This was definitely one of my most fun days on the water, especially because I got to go out with so many amazing people and I shot so many nice fish that day. I also really enjoyed making this video because it allowed me to relive all of these memories and it just gave me a chance to appreciate how much time I get on the water. If you enjoyed watching this video as much as I did creating it, like and subscribe because it lets me know if I'm doing something right. And if there's anything that you see that I could have done differently in this video or any suggestions for future videos, let me know in the comments because all I really want to do is put out the best content that I possibly can. Also, stay tuned for next week's video because there's going to be some absolutely insane moments in there. From shooting a giant moray eel to losing my spear to a big tarpon, there's going to be a lot of madness that goes down, so you definitely don't want to miss out on that. As always, thanks for watching and I hope to see you all next week. Later.